topic for our webinar today is to get out the vote for racial and social justice. So I'm going to be your moderator today. My name is Jason Chang. I am a high school social science teacher with Eastside Teachers Association in San Jose, California. Today we have 4 wonderful panelists with us. So we have Camille Butts, a high school social science teacher with the Association of Colton Educators. David Goldberg, elementary school teacher, UTLA, and also the vice president of CTA. And Ben Cedric Williams, high school social science teacher with United Educators of San Francisco. And then Paul Benson from CSU Stanislaus and student CTA. All right. Before we get started with our questions, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement, right? So, I want to start today's event with a land acknowledgement, and it is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on the land and to seek to understanding your place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. And the land that I am in is the traditional land of the Ohlone people, past and present. And we honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have been their stewards throughout the generations. May we honor their enduring presence on this land by committing ourselves to equity, human rights, and racial and social justice. So please take a moment to acknowledge the people and lands you are currently occupying. And if you don't know, take note to research for the future. All right. So, just to, get started with, so we do have a few questions to bring to the panelists. And we would like to open up with the question of why and how have you engaged in voting, elections, and civic engagement in the past, whether it's your role in the classroom or have you run for local office or school board elections, et cetera, et cetera.
Hello, everyone. I can get us going. So my name is Camille Butts, and as Jason said, I am a high school social science teacher and proud member of the Executive Board of Association of Colton Educators in San Bernardino County. I am also an elected voting member of the San Bernardino County Democratic Central Committee. So that's kind of how I've recently got more engaged with the direct action of participating in this democracy that we live in. But even more importantly than that, one of my greatest focuses as an educator in the social science department is making sure that I'm getting my students to be active and informed voting members of our society once they reach that age of 18 and are able to vote. But even as though I teach juniors, I try to get them to see that they can make change and influence their community, and hopefully they'll stay informed. And once they turn 18, they'll be lifelong voting members.
Excellent. Yes, that was awesome, Camille. Most definitely have to take some notes on that. So my name is Van Cedric Williams. I'm with United Educators, San Francisco. I'm the treasurer. When I think about voting, I think really my relationship with my local really has developed my voting smarts, my ability to really stay focused on the issues. As a educator, I actually sat in and continue to sit on phone banking, precinct walking, one-on-one conversations at my school. Those were like the driving aspects of voting that has always been a part of me. Really seeing the positions that my union is taking, being a part of the COPE committee really got me engaged. Being a part of the endorsement process at my local and looking at other labor partners and seeing what work they were engaging in really just gave me a very good political education. So much so that I've been so inspired that I'm running for a city council, for a school board in Oakland. So it's really something that has become a natural part of me now that I've done it for 10, 15 years, that my local has really inspired me to stay involved. And as Camille said, just spread this information to the young folks of what they need to be aware of. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I was thinking just through the lens of as an educator, and I think being one of the older folks on this panel, I think that some of just interesting what it brought up for me, because when I first started educating and teaching, um, there was actually some really, really heavy, hard votes that really impacted my classroom that were just devastating. There were votes around getting rid of bilingual education, and I was a bilingual educator. There was votes around getting rid of affirmative action, which affected students and communities. There was Proposition 187, which was about even more drastic, just a racist anti-immigrant proposition about that would said educators would have to basically turn in our students to ICE for to be deported. There was a lot of, so kind of the place that we all inhabit as educators, while we didn't maybe choose it, became a very political ground. And frankly, a lot of the votes were ones that we were losing. And so I think that's, I think now what's at stake in a lot of these elections now and how I look at voting is really undoing a lot of that decades of kind of viciousness that happened to us and our students. And so that's the exciting thing that's in front of us, I think, as we look at this next upcoming elections.
If I can speak to that and build off what everyone has said so far, and especially what David just said, when it comes to our members in student CTA and aspiring educators in California, um, there is an increasing degree of engagement in the electoral process, which, I mean, the stakes have never been higher than they are in this year's election in many ways. And just to the in the defense of the young folks, if anything, I know that we may return to this theme of making sure that young people are engaged and informed. I I will argue that young people and aspiring educators especially are among the most informed of young people in in memory. Um, and part of what inspires them is that memory of being students in those um, during those moments, like during the campaigns of Prop 187, and there is memory of being students in K through 12 classrooms ourselves and wanting to vote to improve the lives of our future students and to uh, to vote against um, these old propositions that were, yeah, explicitly racist and anti-immigrant. And yeah, aspiring educators want to turn that over and yeah, start anew.
Thank you for for all of your responses. I think something that I want to probe a little bit more into, because we talk not just about our own actions, but then also the actions that we should be looking at the youth. So I'm kind of curious, like, into a little bit about maybe your own backgrounds, right? It's more like, how did you find about civic engagement, right? Was it one of those things like civic engagement found me, or the other way around?
I feel like I've only recently fully embraced the civic engagement. So I'm in my 10th year of teaching social science. You would think that they would go hand in hand, but I was more of I'll be involved, I'll communicate with my family. But I got involved in volunteering with the American Legion Auxiliary California Girls State. And it's an organization set up to mainly help military families. But then the biggest thing that we do is with rising senior females, because Girls State, we have hundreds of them go out to a college typically in summer, and it motivates them to be civically engaged. And literally during this week of engagement, they circulate and file paperwork to become things as high as governor of California. And seeing those students do this motivated me, in collaboration with being involved with my local service center, to actually do that for myself. So I think in a bigger level, seeing students be so engaged with circulating and filing like, oh wait, I have these platforms and these things that I want to bring to the table motivated me to get more involved. So really seeing my students be motivated to be part of this democratic process was my motivating factor more recently.
Yeah, because I mean, even in my case, it's like it's been a very interesting journey for me, even when it comes to like political activism. I would say I probably haven't even become a political activist until I became a teacher. You know, like I have a political science background, but like the irony was like I wasn't really that active in politics. It was just me thinking, you know, I'm not too informed on these issues. And for me it was I'm in my 5th year of teaching and I teach government and my first year in the classroom was 2016. And like one of the first class I taught was government first semester. Right. So I had to cover that stuff and I was following that closely and you know, we all know what happened after that. And yeah, and in my case personally, like Betsy DeVos being put into Secretary of Ed just got me like, you know, I need to do more, you know, and you know, being able to provide opportunities for my students and educating them so when they become voters in their own right, you know, they can make informed decisions out there, you know, as active citizens of our community.
Yeah, well, Jason, for myself, I think it does kind of revolve around sense of teaching. Like in 11th grade history for me, I actually part of my syllabus was for my students to do a community service project, right? And so each quarter we actually did one. We did three together, and then they did the fourth on their own. First one, we would go read to senior citizens, right, to our elders. We would go just hang out with the elders, hear their stories from back in the day. Another quarter, we would go feed homeless, um, uh, transitional individuals, families, just going out and giving some food. And third one, we would read to elementary kids, which is always the toughest for 11th graders. They just could not understand at one time. They were just running all over the place like that. But reading to the elementary kids, and then I challenged them to find a service project for them to do. But through all of that, it's tying in a sense of civic participation. It's tying in a sense of, we are part of our community, and so we need to be, involved and engaging and understand what's going on. So it's something that um, I mean, it's just great when you see young folks participate like that and they come back and we have a debrief, right? And all their emotions and what they've learned is something so new. It's very satisfying.
Oh, David, I think you're on mute.
I would say for me, being politically active is, I guess my perspective is a little different. Where I grew up in a very political family, so like I was arrested at civil disobedience before I voted, before I was able to vote. And so for me, and that was around back in that day, it was around South Africa and apartheid and taking over the South African consulate. Um, so for me, voting, I really honor places where voting is connected to movements, right? And I think there are some times now where, again, and I guess, like for example, I'm looking at Prop 15, which is a very specific, or Prop 16, which are very specific things that are on our ballot this year, which are really connected. First of all, there are whole movements behind them, the biggest, broadest coalitions, and they're really geared at taking on some really deep, entrenched historical racism and class issues in our country and in our state in particular. And so I think oftentimes I would downplay voting as not being as effective. I think as I've learned more that when it's connected to movements, it is a very powerful tool. And that kind of civic engagement is very powerful. But I think the other work is just as important to really build a movement to create the conditions to actually make winning at the ballot box possible.
that for me, once again, you know, the point that David just made really resonated strongly with me in that I grew up, yeah, being a little bit kind of disillusioned after, after, I mean, I was a young, a very young person in elementary school when the whole Bush v. Gore decision came down from the Supreme Court, and so up until I was able to vote, there was definitely a fair amount of in my own heart a little kind of skepticism about elections and everything, and more more a vision of my own participation in movements. So yeah, that really resonates with me, and that is still that's still how I feel up to this point is that um, elections need to be part of our movement strategies, um, and they can accomplish a lot, like what we hope to accomplish with these um, with the propositions this year, especially with Prop 15. um, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, Paul, thanks for bringing that up. Like honestly, like I remember the whole Gore and Bush thing. Like I was in middle school when that happened, and I, I feel like echo a lot of the things that you're saying. And actually, that's perfect segue to like the next question is, so how's it different this time? It's like, why is this election so different than previous ones before? Yeah, would anyone like to speak to that?
So I'll speak on, I think on a national level, look, this just purely democracy issue. This is about the survival of our democracy in a lot of ways. I also do think this is about, as clear as we can get on a national level, about taking on racism that's been at the real core of so much of this nation for so long. We see some amazing movements in the streets and pushback around some of the races. It's centered around policing, but it's not only been around policing. And I think in some ways there's been a clampdown, right? You're always ready for the pushback, and I think that's been evident as well. And I think this is really about pushing back on that and really electing folks that have at the core of their being a belief in a democracy, but also a belief in a multiracial society that respects everyone. And I think, and again, just winning the election itself isn't going to make that happen. There's going to have to be a movement to continue to make that happen. I think in California, about our particular stuff around, again, I'll talk about Prop 15. We, in California, we used to have the best education system in the nation. We used to have free UCs, free Cal States, free community colleges, the lowest class sizes in the nation. That all went away. That went away in 1978 when we passed Prop 13, which we were told was about saving little old ladies whose property values were going up. But what that was really about, by the way, and I can imagine very few people on this call as a panel or on the audience are still paying 1978 taxes on their homes. That was the ruse they used to get us folks to vote for it. But who is still paying 1978 taxes are the richest corporations in the history of the world. Disneyland paying 1978 taxes, Chevron in California, 1978 taxes. And what we have done, we've disinvested in education, in community services, in county services. And we disinvested, by the way, at the exact same time that we had seen big immigration to California and the majority of our students becoming students of color. So there's a real, passing Prop 15, which will not impact any of our housing values or our taxes, excuse me, because we've already paid our share. Just the corporations will have to, biggest corporations will have to be reassessed. Small businesses are exempt, we're exempt, but it's saying those folks, we got to take care of all of our kids. If 2 generations ago they deserved free UCs, today's kids do. If they deserve low class size, today's kids do. County programs where we could have a healthcare system where we could actually track people under COVID, we deserve that. All of us deserve that. And we don't, and corporations do not get a pass on this. And so I think that's what's at stake here around Prop 15 that makes this such an exciting context for what's going on. Especially, and then I'll be quiet after this, especially our state, we say we like to, we're the resistance. We're the resistance to Betsy DeVos and the Trump and the racism and all that. How can we be the resistance when we can't even take care of our own students? We have the most underfunded public education system, one of the most underfunded education systems in the nation. This is about calling bluff on folks who say that and really pushing forward and saying we got to be engaged with this in a meaningful way. And there's a huge role for us to play as educators in this.
Indeed, when David talks about the passionate movements that are sweeping our entire nation, obviously even going back to like Red for Ed as related to education, it really makes me cautiously optimistic because hopefully we're getting rid of apathy within the millions of people that are able to vote that didn't vote in 2016. So hopefully with all this momentum, as evidenced by so many people demonstrating in Red for Ed, demonstrating in Black Lives Matter, demonstrating in so many different facets to end institutionalized racism and to redo our policing systems, that this is going to turn into these millions of people going out and voting, hopefully in a safe way, and hopefully all of our states allow it to be in a safe way, hopefully with mail-in ballots. And that's kind of why I'm hopeful for 2020 because of this shift, and we no longer have to worry about apathy and millions of votes just sitting at home and not going out and expressing their concern, which is our job to motivate these students to be civically engaged and know that their vote matters no matter what. Like, make your voices heard. There's so many small local elections that are decided by tens of people. Like, get out there, do something, make your voice heard, and that's what I'm looking forward to this fall.
I'd like to ask a question. Can we now? I hope so. Camille, you said that people should get out there. What I'm hearing from teachers and students and community members alike, people wonder how can they get out and get involved? They feel as though they don't have the political savvy. I've been suggesting books and suggesting groups and workshops, telling people they should attend things like this. But what would you suggest? Maybe all the panelists can give some idea on this. Like, what would you suggest for people to do to get involved?
There's so many things you can do just by attending, obviously, this session. Maybe if everyone that participates here can share the link once the video is posted on CTA's website, that's another way of helping people be informed. We all have a political action committee, either at CTA level, your service center level, even your local level. Like, those things make big impact. My not even service center, my local chapter alone gave 2 different school board members $10,000 for this coming election. Like, you need to be informed that these things are happening and that these school board members actually speak and can say and get interviewed in a panel, and you're able to participate if you're a voting member of your local, like, be in those spaces so that you can have a say. And that's like the smallest way, as we're all CTA, be involved with your local, find out when they're hosting candidates to endorse them. Like, that's probably the step one. That would probably be easiest for an average teacher to participate in. And then beyond that, figure out who's in your community, figure out who you know. You probably know more people than you think that are involved in your local government. Jason, you're muted.
So anyways, thank you, Camille, for sharing. So just like kind of like a reminder, like we do have a Q&A session at the end. So just to make sure that, like, the questions are still kind of like flowing and the conversation's going, we'll hold off the Q&A to the end to make it more open. So yeah, so thank you. Yeah, I think there was like there's quite a lot of talk, right, that we've mentioned about like movements, right? And I know we've mentioned, some, and I think it would be a nice way to also just maybe let the attendees and also like the panelists know, it's like, particularly when we're talking about like, okay, it's not just about the elections, but it's also about these movements, right? It's like, what kind of movements are we really talking about? Like maybe more specific, so that our attendees would know, and that's something that they can bring back to their members, to make them, to really build up that kind of coalition for these movements. Like, what kind of movements are we speaking about?
Yeah, so I think that when we're talking about the movements of today, this is a referendum. This is really a referendum on a lot of issues. And it's a referendum about life and death. We've had all year, in the last couple of years, we saw and participate and protest in the treatment of young folks at the border, and many kids dying, families dying. It's a referendum about that. It's a referendum about police abuse, um, racial injustice, criminal justice reform, human rights, environmental justice, health care, quality of education. Like, all the people that were in the streets, showing their frustration with the system, the institutional, systemic racism that is built into these um, levers of mechanism that control our city. It is a referendum on that. People are dying. And in addition to the lack of response to the COVID by our president, people are dying. And so we have to take these emotions, that frustrations, and we have to take them to the polls. We have to get in the voting booth with that same emotion and start to ensure that we're holding candidates accountable for these particular items that are right present in front of us. So I think that we have to look at it as such. We have to galvanize all your friends who came out with you to protest, holler, yell, throw rocks, whatever you did at that time. You need to gather them up and say, it is our time to take this energy and use it in the voting booth, because we have a collective power and we have an obligation, to our community to really hold our political representatives accountable. Thank you.
Jason, I think the other thing that this election does is it really, as it pertains to your question about movements, it really kind of is frankly a switch for us. It's really kind of redefining our role as educators in movements. And we saw that markedly when we saw these amazing, beautiful strikes the last couple of years. 1 out of 7 of our members, by the way, were on strike last year. That's an incredible amount. And some of the strikes, not all, but some of the strikes were not just about the stuff that we had normally fought over, salary and healthcare, right? We saw strikes where people were fighting over the schools our students deserve and willing to really put their necks on the line and stay out on strike until broader community demands were met, right? That is a different kind of way of looking at unionism. Similarly, and I see Sarah Robinson putting in there about Prop 30 and 32, amazing campaigns. We really made sure that education got its funding. That was vitally important. It got us, uh, kept some of the most horrific layoffs that we had seen, devastation of our programs. But what those two initiatives did not do is they were just focused uniquely and only on school funding. So Prop 15 is saying, which will bring in about $12 billion, but is about schools and communities. It's saying we work in communities. About 40% of it will go to schools and the rest will go to communities. It says, and that's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing where we're saying, first of all, to really win what we need to win around taking on Prop 13, which has been the third rail, and keeping the exemptions again for homeowners and all that, but taking on the corporate scandalous loopholes they have, we need to have broader power. And we also need to say that the community services in which we live and our students live are vital. The jobs programs, the libraries, the parks programs, that impacts us and our students. And we're willing to fight in a broader context around what that means. And this is something that we should never take for granted. These kind of coalitions is actually new to us in CTA. It's an exciting thing. It's terrifying because we're taking on the most well-funded folks in the history of the world. And that's why we really, really need to engage with our own members. And we're going to do this in our chapters, in our regions. And we'll talk about that later, how to actually make that happen, and our communities. So that's, I think, in terms of movement politics, that's what's also at stake here in this election.
This is why David's VP. He inspires me to think of things and how we can take everything he's saying and bring it to the classroom. So when I hear David speak, I think, all right, so I need to make sure that I reach out to my students and find out how I can better support them, because as I teach mostly juniors, they're not of age to vote yet. So if I speak to them, or oh wait, I want to see these types of things in my community, I can go out and advocate for them. So if they need job training, help them out with that. If there's some need for after school programs, or if they need counseling, wraparound services, these types of things, in talking with students, because we have that connection as educators where we're in those spaces with students, obviously virtually now, but we can advocate them on a bigger level and hopefully get those changes that help them in their communities, and also obviously help us because we live in those communities too.
Everything that's been said by all my fellow panelists on this question is just, I feel it in my heart, and thank you. And to build off of that, it's, I'm incredibly excited to be a part of this, part of our education union movement in California at this moment, and especially with the kind of work we're doing now, is so much to me. It speaks to the recentering of solidarity in our union movement. And while we may not be always of, and demographically we are not, overwhelmingly we are not of the communities that we're working in, we can endeavor to be in solidarity with our communities. And that's when I see, when I see all these props, I love them. I've got them up above me in my background. When I see props, yes on 16, yes on 15, no on 22, no on 20, yes, no on 20, yes on 25, all of these, all of these kind of electoral strategy that we're working on now, to me, it speaks to our members' desire to engage in labor movement solidarity with the working class people of California, who deserve, good jobs, not to be exploited by companies like Uber and Lyft, and not to to end money bail. All of these are incredibly important expressions of CTA members, labor movement solidarity with working people who compose the communities we serve in, and they're our neighbors. So we've got to get out and fight alongside them any way we can.
Yeah, hey, thank you. All of you have shared really powerful things, and I would have joined you with the virtual background thing, but technology failed me, so it's not. So it's just it's just my room. But actually, so very powerful words that we're really talking about, things that affect our students, and things are, and obviously we are here we're panelists here, we're activists in our own right, And the next question that I kind of want to ask is it kind of has a few layers, right? Is for me, right, is like I feel like I'm one of the loudest ones at my school site, right? And then it's like, where's the rest? We're really talking about like movement, and I agree with with all of you, right? The things that we should be doing, but how would you speak to our colleagues, right? Our members who would say like, you know what, like I don't want to be political, right? Like I don't have time, I don't have time for that. Who really don't see education as a political activity. Like I would argue education is a political activity, but we do have members and educators like, you know what, let's stick to the labor issues. Like why are we involved in this? So how would you speak to them, about all of these issues that that I agree, that I agree with all of you on.
So I'm laughing slightly because obviously when this question is mentioned, my first thing goes back to our former President CTA Eric, and he was talking about every single time for the last year of his presidency, it's all about relationships. Like that literally pops in my head every time you ask, like when we need to engage colleagues. You might be surprised by how much influence every single person that's participating in this webinar right now has. There's probably a group of people that listen to you or that you even have, I don't know, I was going to say lunch with, but we don't have that right now, but maybe you're in like a text messaging thread with them or you're following each other on social media. Like that's probably in this new millennia of technology, the best way to stay engaged and to stay informed. Just post things on social media. All of us are doing it anyway. And if you don't have social media, you're probably out there doing more physical actions than even people on social media. Because I think the easy part is posting on social media. The challenging part is getting out there and making sure you're getting these propositions passed. You're getting public school friendly people in office. From there, have those conversations. Even if you're talking with colleagues that don't necessarily see the same way as you related to politics, you might be able to find common ground more easily than you think. So start up. It's all about relationships. Remember, just start there.
Well, thank you, Camille. I'm sorry. I want to tack on something more, a little bit more to it, because it's actually kind of related to a question that came in the Q&A. Was that on top of that was, have you received any pushback, and if so, what have you done to address it, right? So I just want to add on to that.
Sure. There's and so in student CTA we issued, we made an issue statement after the murder of George Floyd, and began to endeavor to work in solidarity with the movement for Black Lives and to engage with that struggle, as aspiring educators and as members of the labor union movement. Um, and there was a fair amount of pushback that we really have just had to ignore, because it's not there's a fair amount of pushback that, at least when it comes to Black Lives Matter, that is not valid, and we just have to debunk it right off the bat. This all lives matter discourse that is really only intended to derail this movement, for human rights, and this movement against the institutionalized anti-blackness in our country and other, similar countries. Uh, so a bit of it, just have to pay no mind. Uh,
All right. Does anybody else want to speak to that one?
Let's see if I can jump in on this one. So I think that the way I kind of look at it is what's in it for me, because everyone kind of makes a decision of what's best for them. And so, at the school sites that I've been at, I think really the question is, you know, why is this important? Yeah, and my thing is, you don't have to agree with me, but I do want to tell you why I think it's important, right? Which is kind of try to engage the conversation. And I think if we're, you know, doing what we do as unionists, we are having those conversations, and this is a year-long conversation. This is a 2-year conversation. It's not something that occurs overnight, because it's really about trust and being able to have a sense of understanding that actually your politics is not too far off from my politics as well. We pretty much have a very similar idea, which I think a lot of my decisions really are based on my students, right? A lot of decisions I make is how will this impact the future generation, my young folks coming up, and the young folks in elementary and young folks in middle school. Like I really, that is a driving force for me, is the decisions that I make really revolves around what type of world can I um, participate in, that what type of world can I support that will be a world that will allow my students to be their full selves. And so I think those are kind of some of the uh, responses I have when I get pushback, or if an individual just doesn't want to participate. I mean, I can't make you, but what I'd say also is that non-participation is actually an action itself, right? And so I have to really, make sure I say that in any conversation, is that a non-participatory, non-vote, non-engagement, a non-conversation is actually an action in itself. And so individuals have to kind of see where they are going to put their energy in and why it would best support their community. Um, and I think just as, you know, uh, we all have a community of support, our family, our friends, our work sites. And, we have to really be true to that, right? We have to be true to the community that supports us, because we wouldn't be where we are without our community engagement on many different levels. And so it is those conversations to just share that how I may not be able to make you, I wouldn't make you do anything, but to change your mind. But there are a lot of factors that should be under consideration when you choose not to engage. But know that we're here for you and that we love you regardless, right? There's this agape love, this love that for humanity, for you. Like we're doing all of this for each other, but we're doing it for humanity and our students.
Right. So I do want to set aside time for some Q&A, but then I think before we set aside time for Q&A, because we're talking about like involvement and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering if Elise, do you mind sharing the screen, with ways that we can tell our members and how they can take action? All right, thank you. All right, okay, yes, okay, this is the right slide. All right, so yeah, so there are a number of ways, for us to get our members out there, right, to take action. So currently right now, we're like really all hands on deck with Prop 15, Schools and Communities First. And there are those links that are available that will be shared with you. And I believe it would be shared in the chat by our backend team. And then, just to really get out the vote, and then can we move to the next slide, please? All right, thank you. Yeah, and then, really right now we've been talking a lot about, working to improve our schools and communities, and really can't stop talking about that enough. Prop 15, there are, different ways we can train speakers in Spanish, and or you can also join a virtual phone bank. I think there's a next slide. Is there, Elise? All right. So again, there are some areas, within California, like Region 3, Region 4, they're doing phone banking. If you are out in the Region 3, Region 4 area, then, feel free, join them. Or maybe this is something that you can organize in your respective locals to really, join hand in hand to really push forward all of these movements and this election that is coming up in November. All right. So thank you. So with like about the last, oh yeah, and then like down the line, for future events, what kind of topics we would have, feel free to submit them. All right, for future Takeover Tuesdays. So now we have about like 12 minutes left, and there are a few questions that are in the, Q&A that I would like to, bring to the panelists. Right, and I think this one is very interesting because this is one that I've been thinking from time to time. So the question comes, is now the time, or how do you feel about this? Is now the time to compromise with our members who do not see themselves aligned with labor, bail, and police reform and working families? Or is it now the time to say that we are for and solidify the commitments of others who are like-minded?
This is David. So look, I think that what we have to always be mindful about is sometimes there's some of us who are very active in our unions who come with a real political perspective, as do I. And as do, I'm sure, a lot of the folks on this call about Black Lives Matter, around a bunch of issues around the role of policing in our society. I think what we have to always push the envelope, and we also have to be mindful that we are an organization, a union, and we have to really set up deeper, broader discussions around these topics with our members. We owe it to our members to do that. And I think sometimes that's a difference sometimes with an activist and more of a unionist. We are responsible for our organization by really having these deep conversations and pushing stuff, never giving up on pushing stuff around progressive ideals, but also doing it in a way that continues to not take for granted that everyone's at the same spot and really continue. Look, even I talk about these strikes. It was convincing people that it made sense to go out on strike for other issues besides salary and healthcare took years to do, right? That really took years of a lot of, and Camille talked about it, of relationship building and actually really structured. I think sometimes we get away from this, quite frankly, and we don't often see, for example, our work sites as places where these democratic conversations could happen. We often go to a rep council or state council and skip over the places of our work sites, of our grade level discussions, of our places where we really have democratic conversations about these ideas and honor that space and push, but also do so in a way that brings a lot of people into the conversation. And I think when that happens, I think we're all better served. And I think then when we come up with positions, we're really doing it with a power where we don't expose some stuff where we've skipped over those steps.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point, David. And I mean that's something that I try to like emulate is in my classroom too, with my students, right? It's like, they come from different backgrounds, they have very different views, and we don't necessarily see eye to eye on on everything, right? But then if they don't have these conversations, then that just really leads to more of that political polarization that we have, right? People are not having conversations. Um, then how do we really find that solidarity to really move forward? So again, those are really great points. So thank you, David. Are there any other panels that would like to speak to that question?
Some of the moments that have helped me better understand the complexity that is CTA is at state council. When we have issues that might be on the side of more polarizing, and hearing the vast group of the 800 of us express either in our vote or in our words when we go to the mic how we feel about certain things that are being presented to the body, and making sure that everyone's informed where this comes from. So we have policy within CTA that informs our decisions. And as a member of state council, I'm able to be there and represent my local and represent the communities that I serve and help guide this policy that we have. And then that is how we make our decisions. And everything that we do within CTA is based on these principles, this policy that we have. So when we talk about things obviously like police brutality, we have clear language that says that is not something we stand for. Now, there may be some other issues that maybe we don't have strict policy. And yes, as David and both Jason were saying, we need to make sure that we're doing a great amount of work to bring people together, because we represent everyone on all sides and all facets of the spectrum of political ideation. So just making sure that we're having those conversations, we're knowing what our policy is as CTA, and just reaching out and bringing people into the community that we are, because once you find out, oh, this is why we're doing that, that might get people to see, oh yeah, I support that.
Yeah. So actually, in a kind of in a related question, right, to the one that I had put out, or someone else had asked, was, so how do you suggest locals strategize against pushback from members of the community who might think differently than you?
Um, w- one angle of approach that I feel has been pretty constructive in the past has been to to get kind of local with the issues. And like when talking about, when we're having tough conversations about issues that are happening, or that when we're talking about a tough issue like police brutality that is exemplified by the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Jacob Blake, etc. Um, those issues, I feel like, to fair number of people who were, and members who are new to these kind of conversations, uh, it is, I feel like it helps to be mindful that these things can feel far away and outside of our communities. So, and sadly, and unfortunately, there is no community that is untouched by these kinds of horrific acts of violence. Um, so, if one way to approach those difficult conversations is to do and find out ways that these changes need to happen, in why these kind of changes and hard conversations need to happen in your community. Because sadly, if you go digging deep enough, you're going to find something that that brings the conversation home. And that can go for, for other, like, human rights, all the other topics and labor topics that we tend to have difficult conversations about. It has happened in your community, in the community, or nearby, and there's some point of resonance with every one of these issues in every one of our communities.
Well, I guess kind of to like add on to it, like, it's like, what if that community also happens to be your e-board or your rep council, right? Then how should we be approaching that?
I can speak from experience in this situation. I have several members of my association that are on the more conservative side, but no matter what, they are pro public education. And that's where the line is often drawn with many of our candidates. There are very few times where both candidates have the exact same ideology when it comes to public education. And so you can use that to be the delineation between, and this is why we should support this candidate because they are in favor of funding public education at the highest levels possible to provide for all the students that we serve and provide the funding and making sure that we have protected contracts. That's not something that all candidates support. So that can be something that you point to in those challenging conversations, because for many people, there are deal breakers. But for most people, we are here because of public education, and that can be something you always fall back on.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else on the panel would like to speak to that? All right. Okay, so there was a question that came up. This is like, do you have any good, I guess this could be one of the good, like, a question to kind of end it with. We have about 2 minutes left. So any good tips on how to connect with local leaders and officials in an effective way?
I want to remove a stigma from the word effective. Some people think effective has to be this big act. Making a public comment at your school board meeting has done leaps and bounds for my local community. From having a few people participate to at one school board meeting, I think we had a room, our school board room was packed, like there was standing room only. And getting people to do at that local level that impacts you at every single day can be effective. So I would say step one, contact your school board, public comment. If you leave it in time, they have to read it. It's on record, go. Then beyond that would be your county supervisors. Same process as communicating with your school board. They kind of go one and the same. If you learn one, you can communicate with the other and it can be effective.
With local leaders, if they're, um, you know, public office leaders, they're always coming around to get your vote. They're always going to come back around. And so your time will come around when you want to have that serious conversation to say, I'm going to hold you accountable. As a matter of fact, don't give me your office number. I'll take the personal number. I'll take the personal email. We really got to talk about this. So I think when it comes to leaders, public office, I think we just really have to um, make sure we stay in tune to decisions they're making. Um, they will find you is the thing. They will find you, and once they find you, it's your job to stay in touch, to really follow them, because it's something that um, they know what the percentage of voters are out there, and your voice really matters. That's the thing. Like you may not think that, oh, it's just my one vote, but that one vote carries a lot of weight. So I would definitely say for any leader or political office that you're looking at, yeah, you may have to do the research, find out what they're participating in, find out what school they're trying to get to or what, community org, and just showing up and and just take over the conversation, and they will remember you. And that is one way. I always tell folks, find out who do you want to talk to, look them up, find out what event they are, go there. You will get FaceTime, I guarantee. Thank you very much.
The one thing I would add to both their great comments is do all that and always remember that our power in these conversations really is a collective power, right? That oftentimes we get conditioned to see power as being with politicians, when really, whenever we deal with a politician, for example, you never go into a meeting, as Camille said, they organized to be at that school board meeting. You never go into any meeting without already knowing the answer you're going to get, right? Or that you have the power to create the conditions to get that answer. When we have those kind of meetings, we have to have already, again, and our power resonates with our members. We have to have really work site discussions. We have to have a capacity to have site reps, rep councils, that pass stuff and then empower, so that when we have these conversations that Van Cedric is really pointing out, which are great ones, they're coming from a power of our members, and the politicians need to know that. They need to respect that, because that's where our it's not from, up top down. It has to really emanate bottom up.
All right. Paul, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, not really. I'm just trying to just sitting in what all the other panelists have said, and feeling extremely grateful for all of you. Thank you.
All right. All right. So, so we did 503 to, value everybody's time, since, whether school has started for you or not, whether you're a hybrid, distance, it's just a very chaotic school year. In general, I would just like to, really thank you, our panelists. So thank you, Camille, David, Van Cedric, and Paul, for your time, and all the panelists. And all the attendees who are here. I do apologize. There were like 1 or 2 questions that we were not able to get through, but we've taken note of that, and then we will email you and come in contact with you to answer the questions that you have. And then there should be a follow-up with a feedback survey, and then which will also should include all of the links that we had shared earlier and how you can get involved too. So, again, thank you very much for all of your time. Hopefully you have a great school year.